Recently, I released one of my primer videos on one of the most influential Star Wars video game series ever made, Dark Forces and/or Jedi Knight. Without this series, we likely don't get popular titles like Battlefront or even Republic Commando. The Jedi Knight series continues to influence developers to this day, with the most famous and latest example being Respawn Entertainment, the creators of Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor, and an upcoming third title that, from job postings, will draw even more heavily from this source of inspiration. But if we're gonna talk about this series, we have to realize that Dark Forces and afterwards Jedi Knight and its sequels are ultimately the story of Kyle Katarn, rebel, mercenary, failed and redeemed Jedi, and not just a mentor in the latter days of his life, but a very unique kind of Jedi, one that breaks very much every mold and blueprint for what a Jedi should be, or where they should come from. So let's look at Dark Forces and Jedi Knight from the eyes of its protagonist, Kyle Katarn. From a development standpoint, Kyle was a replacement. You see, the original plan for Dark Forces was for the star of the show to be Luke Skywalker. But very quickly, the developers at LucasArts realized that adding our favorite moisture farmer as the lead in the series would restrict the kind of stories they could tell, not to mention likely bringing a lot more oversight in terms of the narrative, given that the canon of Star Wars, especially back then, very much rested on Luke's shoulders. So they needed a new face, and enter Kyle Katarn. In-universe though, Kyle was, curiously, also a farm boy, only not an adopted one, and one that wished to head to the Imperial Academy. And if this sounds familiar, it's not an accident. It's very much Luke in Episode 4. If you remember, he wanted to leave to the Academy much like his friend Biggs, seeing it as his way out of Tatooine. Kyle did make it to the Academy and had a military career, but would eventually discover the horrors of the Empire, abandon it, and end up working for the other side. Now, for those of you Star Wars lore nerds, this might be ringing bells as well, and you'd be correct, as this is, in broad strokes, very much Han Solo's story. So Kyle's origin is very much a pastiche of elements of the original film's lead characters. And he's not the only one. Han Solo clones were all the rage in the 90s, with shining examples like Dash Rendar, the hero of the Shadows of the Empire multimedia product line, a man flying a ship that even looks like a Millennium Falcon knockoff. But to give Dash his props, at least he's still canon. They added him back in a companion book to the Solo movie, as a tongue-in-cheek reference, because as far as Wish.com Han Solos go, Dash is the most blatant copy. In terms of the story of Kyle Katarn, there isn't that much to say about Dark Forces, the original game that introduced the character to us. There aren't really that many cutscenes, only a handful that set up the missions, especially if it's a boss fight. Afterwards, the actual mission is then presented in text. The bulk of the game is Kyle heading from place to place, following the trail of the Dark Trooper project, coming face to face with these mechanized monstrosities and their creator, even having a little trip on Darth Vader's Superstar Destroyer, the Executor, or as I like to call it, the Compensator. But there are 4 key elements to take from Dark Forces, and I'm mentioning one of them just because it adds to the legend of Kyle Katarn. First up, the opening mission has Kyle retrieve the plans for the Death Star. That's right, in the olden days, in the halcyon pre-Disney era, this wasn't a complicated mission with very little chance of survival on a beach planet to retrieve the plans. Nope. Kyle storms in, kicks butt, takes names, chews bubblegum, grabs the plans, and goes home. Second, midway through his missions, he has a close encounter of the Fett kind. Yeah, that's right, Boba Fett is one of the boss fights, and Kyle's added to the list of people who have encountered Boba Fett and defeated him in battle. It's an exclusive club with esteemed members such as Darth Vader, because yeah, those two fought at one point. There's Jaden Korr, who's Kyle's apprentice way into the series, and of course the Sarlacc monster, who really did a number on old Boba. The third is the introduction of Jan Ors, who on this mission acts like Kyle's liaison with Mon Mothma and was his analyst in terms of the missions and the intel gathering. Jan is important in Kyle's life, as she not only becomes his partner in more ways than one, but is also the person that revealed to Kyle the truth of the Empire and their part in the death of his father, which will be the impetus for his defection. And lastly, at the very end, when Vader learns of all that's transpired, he has but one thing to say, one very critical thing.
The Force is strong with Katarn.
But after the events of Dark Forces, after the fall of the Empire, the Imperial remnant is still around. Scattered forces of soldiers and officers clinging to the shreds of their former power, latching on to whatever source of authority they can find, such as the Imperial Inquisitor Jarek, a Miraluka, a species of Force-sensitive humanoids without eyes, but capable of seeing through the Force itself. Jarek is obsessed with the legend, the Valley of the Jedi, the location of an ancient battle between the forces of light and darkness, a place that holds their combined power and souls, very much what would be the desecrated battleground haunted location in any horror movie. But Jarek is convinced this place will give him godlike power. He hunts down a specific Jedi, and that's a tough one, considering there aren't that many around at this point in time. After all, the time of the Empire was like Dog Hunt. Except the dog laughs when you shoot something instead of missing, and the ones laughing were Palpatine and Vader. And of them, Vader primarily. The man had a raging infatuation with doing with the Jedi what he did to the younglings in Return of the Sith. But Jarek was good at his job, and he had a cadre of Darksiders with him. Yun, the youngest of the crew, kinda naive for a Darkseid Force user. Saris, the second in command, a femme fatale if I've ever seen one. Bok, the court jester. Think of him as Bib Fortuna's deranged cousin. There's Gort and Pick, twins, in the Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito sense, just infinitely more messed up. And lastly, Maw, unfortunate hoverman Maw. Jarek found his man, Kuran, and before sending him to his demise, he ripped the knowledge from his mind that Morgan Katarn held the map of the Valley of the Jedi, embedded into the roof of a workshop in his home on Solon. But Kuran had one last card to play, and before Jarek killed him, he took one of their lightsabers. And remember when I called Maw unfortunate? Well, it's because Ron cut him in half, and he survived, strapped to a hoverboard to keep him aloft. Imagine the hoverboard scene from Back to the Future 2, but just really messed up. That's Maw. The name Morgan Katarn was a surprise for Jarek, given that they had already crossed paths. Morgan, more than a farmer, was also a rebel leader, not to mention naturally gifted in the Force, having been Force-sensitive since childhood, though a traumatic incident made him feel unworthy of such abilities, and he really didn't use his powers all that much. In helping the Rebel Alliance, he found himself on Rusan, and there he discovered the Valley of the Jedi. Later on, he would confide in Kuran about his experience, and it was Ron who told him to hide the map, and even gave Morgan his lightsaber for safekeeping. Morgan would then create a video for his son, explaining everything, and put it on a disc that only their family droid Ouija could decode. Now, even if you've played the entirety of the Dark Forces games, the Jedi Knight games, the above summation of Morgan's life and times may sound like I'm making all this up, but I am not. All of this lore, if we're calling it that, is from a radio drama called Dark Forces Rebel Agent, based on the novelizations of Dark Forces and Jedi Knight, which expanded on the story. But that's only in terms of finer details, because it is worth remembering that Jedi Knight is very much from the era of games where we still had player manuals. And in that manual, it states clearly that Morgan was Force-sensitive, that he fought the Empire, and that he found the Valley of the Jedi, and informed Ron of this fact. So even if it's not in the game itself, it was included in the game's media at the time. Back then, the manual was part of the experience of getting the game. In the novelization and drama, Morgan would meet his end in the aftermath of a battle with the Empire. He and other rebels fought to protect a geothermal tap, which everyone used to have clean water and energy without having to pay taxes to the Empire. Of course, the Empire, always looking for that bottom line, didn't quite like that, so they went in for its destruction. The rebels fought bravely, but were ultimately defeated. Morgan himself was taken and put through terrible interrogation procedures by Jarek himself. But when Morgan proved to be too resilient and too stubborn, Jarek killed him and had his head put on a spike for everyone to see as an example. Knowing the Empire was responsible for his father's death, Kyle sought an information broker, one that would deliver the name of his father's killer so he could have his revenge. Sitting in a cantina in Nar Shaddaa, the vertical city, moon of Nal Hutta, planet of the Hutts, watching a holo of his father and him from when he left to the academy, a memento of their time together. 8T88, a droid and Kyle's informant, arrives and reveals that it was Jarek that killed Kyle's father. He also reveals that Jarek has big plans and that the broker's loyalty has been bought. Jarek wishes for Kyle to be removed, but there's a problem. You see, 8088 went to Morgan's farm and found the disc Kyle's father left for him, but can't decipher it. So he offers Kyle a painless death if he would do him a solid and tell him how to unlock the disc's secrets. Kyle refuses, tells them to do their worst, and this is one instance where no remaster, remake, or new edition has ever changed what transpired. Kyle shot first. Well, attacked first. 88 walks away, two grand thugs coming to Kyle's booth. One of them holding a gun to his temple, the other pointing a gun at him from the other side of the table. The thug says something in an alien language, but Kyle grabs the man by his side, throws him across the table, takes his gun and points it at the other thug, telling them he's not going anywhere. He's got questions for 8088. And this is where the game begins, and it's you holding a gun and a grand thug in front of you. If you shoot him now, then my comment on Kyle shooting first works even better. Kyle pursues 8088 and manages to wound the droid, shooting off his right arm, the one holding the disc, which tumbles down into the lower levels of Nar Shaddaa. Just then, a TIE bomber appears and shoots on Kyle, who barely avoids the fire. And before the fighter can take a fatal shot, Kyle's old partner Jan shows up for the save, piloting Kyle's ship, the Moldy Crow. Kyle tells her he has to get the disc and to pick him up on another level of the city, and coincidentally another level in the game. Kyle finds the disc fairly quickly and then makes his way to the upper levels, and though he's shot and bruised and hurt, he manages to rendezvous with Jan, who takes him to get patched up. While he's receiving treatment, he has a vision, set in the very Valley of the Jedi. Ron tells Kyle that he's at a turning point in his life. Jarek, the man who killed his father, seeks the power of the Valley, and with it, he will have power untold. As Rand puts it, he could trigger supernovas with a thought, eradicate life in a star system with a whisper. He says Morgan protected the Valley and its secrets, and now it falls to Kyle to do the same. And the disc he holds will be his first steps onto the path of the Jedi and the ways of the Force. Now, in terms of the discourse around Jedi Knight and generally Jedis themselves and their origins and their abilities, I've read many a complaint about the way Kyle gets his abilities. Some think that the explanation is bad, that it's shallow and simply an excuse to give players what they wanted from the first game: lightsabers and powers. And while the business and development side of that is very true, people did want lightsabers and powers in Dark Forces, and Jedi Knight was meant to deliver on that. But I've always found Kyle's journey to be fairly good. Kyle is having Force visions, talking to Force spirits, and Vader himself said that he is strong in the Force, so there is enough there to explain the Force sensitivity. And we can add to that his dad was Force sensitive. And again, the manual was there. In the game manual, Ron is said to have been elated on discovering the existence of the Valley, and that he had a vision of what was to come, that Morgan had a part to play. But most importantly, that Kyle had a Jedi destiny that would be revealed in time. This is why he leaves his lightsaber with Morgan, so that he can reach Kyle. For me, even before reading the manual, I had always thought that Ron contacting Kyle and creating this connection between them was his way to jumpstart Kyle's power, to take him from merely Force sensitive into that deeper connection to begin manifesting Force abilities. The novelizations, of course, expand on this by having Ron provide a bit more direct guidance. But Kyle is ultimately still a self-taught Jedi. With only the disc as the lead, Kyle arrives on Sulan and the remains of his father's farm, finding it overrun by grave Tusken. Yep, Tusken Raiders are in this game, even though you don't put a foot on Tatooine. Apparently they're Maul's personal strike force, left to rummage around and see what they can find, or to take out anyone coming to ask questions. The source of this is an old, now archived article from the official Star Wars site, but no real explanation is given in the game. Hell, they only sound like Tusken Raiders, but don't really look the part. Kyle finds the workshop and plays the disc, realizing that the roof has been taken for a reason. On arrival to Sulan, he had seen 3 of Jarek's circle taking some stone slabs from the house, Saris giving the order that they be taken to 8088 in Baron's head for analysis. Kyle realizes those stones are the map to the Valley of the Jedi, and that he still needs to get to his old buddy 88. And along with the message his father left for him, he finds Ron's lightsaber, with his father telling him to use it well and to use it for good. And this is where, in gameplay, you begin to unlock Force abilities and can spend points on them, earning extra points if you find all the secrets in a given level. It is really quite the experience to find all the secrets in the entire game and maxing out pretty much all available abilities. Overpowered doesn't begin to describe it. Now, the Jedi ability screen has a dual purpose, one that I've always found to be quite clever. At first, you only have the core powers available, and this in itself is pretty nice, seeing Force abilities categorized into core, light, and dark. Speed, jump, sense, and pull are the core abilities, And then you have the different light and dark powers. Depending on how many points you put into light or dark is what determines which ending you're heading towards. If Kyle is going full on dark side powers, it means he's heading down the super fun slide of evil. If you use primarily light side powers, then Kyle is a good boy. With only force speed and his new lightsaber at his disposal, Kyle uses the waterways connected to his home to escape and rendezvous once more with Jan, heading both into Baron's Head, a spaceport and where Kyle might find 8088, to retrieve the map and maybe get some payback from the droid mercenary, who at this point has finished his work and has been told to reach one of Jarek's ships, where his payment is being held. Kyle storms through Baron's Head and reaches an Imperial palace with walkers and turrets protecting the exterior. Impressive for sure, but not really something that can create much trouble to someone with superpowers. Using his new force-powered speed, Kyle leaps across the air and over the moat, so to speak, taking stormtrooper after stormtrooper on his way to 8088. Unfortunately for him, the droid is once again one step ahead, leaving him to contend with Yun, the first test of Kyle's abilities, and his first fight against a Force user. And this fight sucks. Yun jumps around like Tigger, blinds you, becomes invisible, and generally speaking has all the powers that you'll have speed. Not to mention, this is where you learn that in Jedi Knight, other weapons don't exactly deal a whole lot of damage to Force bosses. You're meant to use the lightsaber, and it's a rough fight. But upon his defeat, Yun expects death only to receive the one thing he had never seen before, and which would have a tremendous impact on him: mercy. Kyle refuses to kill him and even allows him to escape, only to come under literal fire from stormtroopers and forced to do his damnedest to make his own escape, heading with Jan to the refueling station where one of Jarek's transport ships is docked, getting fuel for the big journey to the valley. 8088 was heading to that ship to obtain his reward, and he gets everything he deserves. And by that I mean he gets his head chopped off by Pick and Gork. Before Kyle can reach the Brothers of the Sith, which is how their boss level is called, he has to make it through the refueling station, a level where you end up swimming in a whole lot of fuel and where you use your weapons to force some spectacular explosions in the fuel lines. It's rather entertaining, but really incredibly dangerous. Gork and Pick fight as a team, with Gork slow and lumbering but hard-hitting, and Pick swift, jumping, and moving around like Yoda in the prequels, also using Mind Trick to turn invisible. Apparently the name Brothers of the Sith comes from them being experimented on by one of Palpatine's scientists, so that they share genetic material, abilities, and a connection through the Force. Yet again, this is not explained in the game or the manual, this time from a series of modules for the Star Wars tabletop RPG. A lot of context and details found outside of Jedi Knight itself. I suppose we could see it as a testament of the impact of this series and its popularity, but it is a bit annoying that all the pieces aren't there in the same place. Nevertheless, Kyle overcomes the twins and gets 8088's head, which, connected to Ouija, gives Kyle access to the map to the Valley of the Jedi. And he and Jan make the trip to Ruzan in pursuit of Jarek and his forces, with Kyle taking the ground approach, while Jan takes a bird's eye view of the situation to understand what's going on with their enemies. By this point, Kyle has become a one-man army. Not only does he have the usual FPS impossible for one man to carry armory, consisting of his trusted Briar pistol, a blaster rifle, a minigun-like carbine, Wookiee bowcaster, multiple grenades, multiple fragmentation mines, think space claymores, a concussion rifle, and a rocket launcher, along with a lightsaber and burgeoning Force abilities, which at this point have started to include both light and dark side powers. So what I'm saying is he's overpowered, and really it's Doomslayer levels of over-the-top carnage ability, especially considering you can chop people's arms off. It's so ridiculous that these levels throw squadrons of stormtroopers at you, and they don't miss. Neither do the ATSTs you come across more than a few times. Still, nothing will stand in Kyle's way, and he manages to reach the top of the service elevator, being used to reach the entrance to the temple complex that is part of the Valley of the Jedi. Unfortunately, that's where he finds his next opponent, Maw. Yun was a dive of the deep end, the twins the trial by fire. Maw is your first fair fight. Both skilled and both with powers, with Maw's only advantage the fact that he's not landlocked and can very much fly away and choose where he will engage Kyle. But eventually, he also falls. Every time I've played this game, I've treated this fight like a joust. I run at him, slash, turn around, run at him, slash, and so on. It's actually my favorite fight. Maw is down and urges Kyle to finish the job, to kill him. and Maul just lays it on thick. Tells Kyle about his father and how he died, and the fact that Maul had the honor of putting his head on the spike. Kyle is overcome with grief and anger and hatred and strikes Maul down, losing himself, for a moment stepping on the line to the dark side. And this is your crossroad. This is where Jedi Knight makes you decide if it's going to be light or dark. If you've kept from killing innocents and allocated primarily to the light side, the big important slider of morality will go towards light. If you've been a happy chaotic murder hobo and really enjoyed cosplaying as Darth Vader and being very disappointed in people's lack of faith, then you'll veer towards dark. And yes, I know before this I had mentioned that it was mostly the powers that decide this, and in general it is, but your actions do carry some weight. And I like that, because there's an element of roleplay, of immersive sim even, where your actions and playstyle determine if you're on the naughty or nice list. Nothing beyond the morality slider tells you that you're being a good guy by not murdering everyone in your path. You don't get Paragon points for not being an awful human being. It's very much your choice to do as you please, and then, well, the rest is consequence. It's also great storytelling to put this choice right after Kyle loses his composure. A moment of weakness. One that has been the downfall of many other Force users. It's in these moments that many slip to the dark side, and it takes a lot of resolve and willpower to restrain yourself and course correct, which is exactly what light side Kyle does. Now, I'll continue this narration following the canon path, the light side, but I'll mention the dark side differences where needed. Jarek arrives with the rest of his remaining entourage and their new prisoner, Jan. Jarek attempts to stoke the flames in Kyle, tempting him with the dark side and telling him to kill Jan to complete his fall. But Kyle follows another path and turns off his lightsaber, refusing to harm his partner. Jarek, disappointed, blasts him with a force ability and sends him tumbling onto the walkway that leads to that transport ship where Kyle fought the twins. The walkway and its supports shatter, and Kyle has no choice but to enter the ship for safety. Unfortunately for him, somehow Jarek has also made the ship lose power, sending it tumbling down to the valley floor. On the dark side version, Kyle takes out Jan without any shred of mercy. But instead of following Jarek, he decides he will take the power for himself, which leads to overall the same events. Kyle manages to reach the Moldy Crow, his ship, the one Jan had been piloting, held in the hangar of the transport ship, and uses it to barely escape the crashing monstrosity. But it's not a clear escape. You know the phrase, if you can walk away, it's a good landing? Well, in this case, Kyle ends up unconscious and at the mercy of Saris, Yun, and Buck. So, bad landing. Most definitely a bad landing. Buck destroys Kyle's lightsaber and viciously mocks him, leaves taking care of Kyle to Saris and Yun. Saris attempts to kill Kyle, Yun blocks her saber and he's struck down instead. Saris is confused, but Yun tells her that he's a Jedi. He deserves a fair fight. It is in fact Yun's lightsaber that you use from this level onwards. In the dark side version, the above scene doesn't happen. Kyle makes a clear escape, but is confronted by Yun as soon as he lands. Saris is nowhere to be seen, and her fate is left uncertain until the ending cutscene. This is one of the fights where being a dark Jedi makes things easier. There is debris littered around the battlefield, and one of the force powers is throw, with which you target an enemy and rocks and other loose objects fly and crash into that character. Your battlefield is the crash site for the big transport ship. There's a lot of trash to use as a weapon, and it makes short work of Jarek's dark side puppy. Back on the light side, with Saris gone and Yun pining for the fjords, it's down to one bodyguard and the man of the hour, Jarek. But now Kyle has to break into the Valley of the Jedi and reach Jarek before he can become all-powerful. The journey to the valley is through the temple complex, with many elegantly carved rooms and alcoves, and a bunch of Kel dragons there waiting to rip you to pieces, like they've done with all the stormtroopers. Hell, the Empire throws one last ATST at you near the end of this level, and I still don't know how it got there. That is a bigger mystery than any of the mystical stuff. In the valley proper, in the core, Kyle finds Jan tied up and cuts her loose, telling her to back away while he confronts Jarek. First, Bok stands in his way, and Bok is a weird fight. Jumps around like a lunatic and makes it very hard to pinpoint and strike him, and getting up close and personal for an extended period of time is very dangerous. Funnily enough, this fight is incredibly easy on the light side, as its ultimate power, Force Protection, which essentially works like an endless shield, very much makes short work of Bok, as you can put Crazy Baby in the corner and wail on him. With Buck gone, Jarek emerges from the core of the valley, having already absorbed a smidge of its power and ready to remove this final obstacle and put an end to the Katarn family. But unfortunately for him, things don't go to plan, and despite being charged with the power of the valley, this infusion is not permanent. Not yet anyway, and as the injuries pile up from his fight with Katarn, Jarek desperately attempts to reach the core again to regain his strength and vitality. But Kyle, relentless, steps in his way and strikes him down before Jarek can do so. The above is more or less the strategy that you use to beat Jarek. After dealing him a significant amount of damage, Jarek will abandon all offense and focus on getting to the core to heal. If you allow it, the fight more or less resets. If instead you literally body block him from reaching the core, he won't defend himself from any of your attacks, making this one weird final boss fight. But in the end, with Jarek defeated, Kyle has brought peace to the valley. Before they leave, Kyle shows his skills in sculpting with a lightsaber by making a couple of statues in the valley. One for Ron and one for his father. In the dark side ending, on the other hand, Kyle uses the power to restore the Empire. Now under his rule, with Saris acting as his second in command. We see him on his throne watching that holo from the start of the game, only now he seems disgusted by it. He drops it to the floor and crushes it underfoot. From the end of Jedi Knight, Kyle didn't exactly become a Jedi Master. Luke even offered to continue his training, but Kyle was reticent, afraid of the pull of the dark side, and instead continued to work with the New Republic as he had done so before, when they were just the Rebel Alliance, with Jan and myriad allies. Eventually though, a Force user sought him out, Mara Jade, former Hand of the Emperor. She was trying to find her feet in the Force, so to speak, having recently abandoned the dark side but still unsure of herself, something that Kyle knew a lot about. Kyle took Mara Jade as his apprentice, and during her training, the base they were on came under attack, with Kyle leaping into action and resolving the situation before departing, as he had something to look into regarding an old Sith temple somewhere on Dromund Kaas, a place that was once a colony for the Sith Empire many centuries before. For the majority of Mysteries of the Sith, the expansion pack for Jedi Knight, the player controls Mara Jade, as she's taking charge of some missions for the Republic in Kyle's absence, honing her skills as she does so. But as she completes her missions, she realizes no one has heard anything from Kyle in a while, so she pursues her master to Dromund Kaas and an ancient Sith temple, and was horrified to see that he had fallen to the dark side, the whispers of the dark in the temple having completely influenced him. Mara Jade and Kyle fought, and during this battle she realized there was only one way to redeem him, and that was to place her trust on him, no matter how dangerous that might be. She dropped her weapon and stood defenseless against the dark side empowered Kyle, stepped up to strike her down, only to stop at the last moment, coming to his senses and surrendering. Mysteries of the Sith does both an amazing and horrible job with the journey to find Kyle. Overall, the expansion is hard as nails, with most enemies having rocket launchers by default. Not to mention the Sith areas in Dromund Kaas being a significant difficulty spike, including some damn tiger things that will kill you no matter how much health or shields you have. I quite disliked them in fact, but Kyle's attitude, his callousness and villainous taunts are outstanding. And ever since I played Final Fantasy IV, I've been a big fan of that twist of the way to win is to stop fighting. And it fits so perfectly in the story. The only way to reach Kyle, to make him remember who he is and where his priorities are or should be, and realize that the power is not worth losing loved ones, something that Kyle is familiar with, is to simply stop resisting and trusting that he would do the right thing. It's a leap of faith, and Kyle, just as he did after killing Maw, stops himself from hurting someone he loves and renounces the dark side. After this recent experience and the one in the hunt for the Valley of the Jedi, Kyle's confidence in himself in terms of resisting the pull of the dark side was at an all-time low, so he decided to distance himself from the Force, effectively shutting off his Force sensitivity. He gave Luke his lightsaber for safekeeping and returned to the life of a mercenary and agent of the New Republic alongside Jan, the two of them being the only people who knew where the Valley of the Jedi was. But years later, things would once again become tumultuous for Kyle. On what was a milk-run mission to Kejim to investigate an Imperial Remnant presence, Kyle and Jan discover people being experimented on, the Remnant embedding crystals into their bodies. To the return to the New Republic, Mon Mothma tells them that her analysts think these experiments are to infuse people with the power of the Force. Not to mention they've intercepted transmissions that mention the Valley of the Jedi. Kyle is not happy about this. He feels if he can put the Valley of the Jedi behind him and forget about it, then so can rest of the universe. From there, they travel to Artus Prime, home of the would-be guinea pigs for the Empire, a mining colony. Kyle doesn't want to go, really wanted to stay as far away as possible from the Force. But when Mon Mothma offers to double their pay, Jan jumps on the chance. I would too, that's big money. But it's on Artus Prime that tragedy strikes. Their mission is simple: infiltrate, figure out the extent of the Imperial presence, and then call in the fleet to destroy them. The initial plan goes well, and they even release Republic soldiers that were held prisoner. Kyle is nearing the rendezvous point. He finds that Jan's been captured by a pair of Darkside Force users, a human named Tavion and a Chistori warrior, think Lizard Man, called the Sun. Take Jan on their ship, and though Kyle tries his best, without access to the Force, he's no match for the Sun. Darksider lifts Kyle up in a Force choke and laments at the sorry state of the legendary Kyle Katarn, and wonders if Jan will offer a bit more resistance. Then changes his mind and orders Tavion to kill her, and Kyle can only hear her dying scream. The Sun simply tosses him aside and leaves. Reeling from the loss, the guilt, and consumed by a desire for vengeance, Kyle wants to get his powers back, and his best idea is to take a dip in the Valley's power, to jumpstart his battery. While in his past journey the spirit of Ron was there to guide him forward, this time around there's another familiar spirit there to attempt to hold him back. His father, Morgan Katarn. Morgan asks Kyle if he thinks the power will make him feel better, or more importantly, that he can wield it safely with so much pain and rage. Kyle tells him that Jan is dead, that the only thing he has left is that pain and anger. And here Morgan asks him if Jan would want him to strike out with those feelings. And that seems to clear some of the haze for Kyle, and he admits that no, she wouldn't. Morgan tells his son to remember her as she was instead. But Kyle still walks into the power stream, reigniting his connection to the Force by, well, force, and seeks out Luke Skywalker in his academy on Yavin 4. Unbeknownst to Kyle, him going to the Valley was exactly what the Zan hoped to achieve, and as Kyle leaves the orbit of Ruusan, the Zan's forces arrive and his reborn warriors begin to be infused with the power of the Valley of the Jedi. At the Jedi Temple, Kyle asks for his lightsaber back. Luke questions his motives, and Kyle tells him the news, but before he can say the name of her killer, Luke does it for him, and then tells him a bit of the man, a former apprentice shunned in his home world for his seemingly magic abilities, but found a home and acceptance with the Jedi, though eventually he became more abusive and saw the weak as unworthy, and even killed a fellow apprentice for this very reason. He fled before they could counsel him, as Luke puts it. Before Kyle can have his lightsaber back, Skywalker tells him he must overcome a trial. And this is a test of the gameplay tutorial variety, and I love this mission in Jedi Outcast. I love how tutorial and storytelling combine. The trial makes perfect sense. It's been years since Kyle has even touched the Force, and now he's here on a quest for revenge and wants his saber back? I would be doubtful too, and would put this trial in front of him so that if he fails, if he's not fit for the task, I can stop him and find some other path for him. In fact, when Kyle completes the trial, Luke expresses his surprise and admits that he almost expected, and I think perhaps even hoped, that Kyle would fail. But this remarkable success and Kyle avoiding his gaze tells him everything he needs to know. That Kyle's taking a sip of that Jedi Power Sunny D Force juice pack. But Kyle defends his actions, stating he doesn't have the time to spend years retraining. He has to be back in his A game as soon as possible. But Luke reminds him of the danger he poses to the galaxy if he should fall to the dark side, being one of the only two people who know where the Valley is. Little does he know that the number of people with those coordinates on their GPS has recently blown up, and Kyle, seeing Luke's point, adds him to the list of people who know where Ruusan is. Skywalker has a lead for Kyle though, a Rhodian entrepreneur called Rilo Baruch. Rilo runs a successful garbage disposal business in Nar Shaddaa, and because it's been historically proven that if you live in Nar Shaddaa, there has to be something shady about you, Rilo is, of course, a massive criminal kingpin. And this man has hands down the biggest claim to fame in the entirety of the Jedi Knight series, and I'd argue in the overall Star Wars, as Kyle reveals that Rilo has such a massive power base that the Hutts won't touch him. You know how hard a criminal you have to be for the Hutts to go nope? Especially on the moon of their home world? It almost makes me glad that this story is no longer canon. I don't think the new canon can handle Rilo Baruch. Luke tells Kyle to leave the Raven's Claw, his new ship in this game, in the academy and to take one of theirs. as it might be a bit less conspicuous and help him get to Nar Shaddaa without all the guns pointing at him. It doesn't last very long. When in Nar Shaddaa, the best place for information is usually a place of ill repute, more often than not a bar. And Kyle attempts to strong-arm a Sith bartender with a horrible diction and grammar to tell him where he can find Relo. And this sparks not exactly a bar brawl, but a bar shootout, with everybody pointing their guns at the newly reminted Jedi, and this is where Jedi Knight 2 and Academy's version of Force Speed comes into its own. In the first Jedi Knight, it's a massive boost to your run speed, and of course has an effect on your jump and Force jump. In Jedi Outcast and Academy, it still helps with long jumps, but the primary benefit is that much like when the Flash runs, everyone around Kyle moves in slow motion, so you can really cut a swath through your enemies. The Grand Thugs chucking grenades, a menace in the first Jedi Knight, continue to be just as proficient in the sequel. This level of Nar Shaddaa, without a doubt, is one of the best representations of the city and its vertical nature. Even though the path is limited to a handful of floors, you're in a tall walkways with only the void beneath you, and it made me question the safety standards of Nar Shaddaa. There isn't a single railing to prevent anyone from having a long fall and a sudden stop. Methinks civil engineering is not on the Hutt's list of priorities. It's also true that this level in Jedi Outcast absolutely sucks in how unfairly difficult it is. And it's not because of the sheer amount of thugs that stand in your way, almost as if someone put a hit on Kyle. No, it's because this level introduces a new weapon to the Jedi Knight saga, the Disruptor Rifle. At first glance, it's a simple rifle that fires a rather hurty orange beam, but by going to its zoom mode, not only does it hurt harder, proving once more that sniper rifles in video games deal more damage with the scope on, but you get a charged shot ability that at max completely vaporizes the target. I'm not making this up, any one shot, including you, turns to ashes. Now care to guess how many snipers there are on this level? There's enough of them that even me, who loves Nar Shaddaa in all its appearances, absolutely despises this level. It's so frustrating. On the upside, if you've ever wanted a sniper battle in Star Wars, well, here you go. Eventually, Kyle rides on one of the garbage collection barges and finds his way to Relo's headquarters. He finds an interesting gentleman with a rather lavish pleasure barge ship known as Lando Calrissian, who came to talk to Relo about some shady business going on in Bespin that Relo's involved in. Got captured and put in a cell instead. Kyle finds Relo and questions his motives for helping the Sand. And I could have told you Relo's answer before the Rodian did. Cash. He's a crime lord, it's usually cash. But unfortunately for Kyle, this chat is happening through thick glass, and Kyle is very much in the center of an arena. So of course, it's a fight. And when Kyle reaches Relo's office, the Rodian is nowhere to be seen. Kyle helps Lando escape, and together they make it to the hangar holding his ship. Before they leave though, they have a showdown with Relo, armed to the teeth and with a whole lot of goons. But while Relo has numbers and even a mounted gun placement, you have the main guns on a ship. Not much is left of Relo afterwards. But in talking with Lando and the short conversation with Relo, it's clear that the smuggling ring operation on Bespin is very much connected to the Remnant and the Sun. So without any other clues, it's off to the Cloud City. Kyle has a nightmare on the journey to Bespin, and when he wakes, Lando tells him that he's spoken to the Republic and they're sending a team to help clear out the Remnant. But Kyle isn't happy about this because they'll tip off the Sand. Lando, confused, tells him the Sand can wait, that the priority is get the Empire out of Bespin. And that's when Kyle reveals Jan's fate to him, when before he had just been vague about her not being with him. Thinking quickly, Lando tells Kyle he'll drop him off on the lower levels, and that the Sand and his forces are likely somewhere around level 10, but that he'll need to find a droid that Lando stashed away with all the different access codes to the city. A little insurance policy that Lando put aside ever since that scene when Vader changed the terms of their deal. Lando tells him he'll grab the security forces and try to work their way down to rendezvous with Kyle and hopefully put a stop to things before the Republic even arrives. Now, I mentioned the verticality of Nar Shaddaa. It doesn't hold a candle to the sheer scope of Bespin. You literally go from the very bottom of the floating platforms to the very streets of the city. Dozens of floors going up, with many a challenge on the way, including the first of the Reborn. The soldiers infused with the power of the Force and wielding lightsabers. They can be surprisingly difficult when you first fight them, but eventually just cutting your way through them. But still, the first time they and other enemies appear, it's quite a surprise. While Jedi Outcast does have a few boss fights, the real challenge is just a steady and well-paced stream of Force-empowered soldiers to contend with. And Kyle even has multiple fighting stances, as the Reborn also vary their combat tactics. For me, I primarily used the quick style as soon as I got it. The sheer number of attacks makes quick work of most people when you have force speed turned on. And now with force jump and force healing in the mix, things start to get interesting in Jedi Outcast, especially as you start unlocking other abilities like grip and lightning. We can see Kyle's personal style of using the Force begin to form. Not your standard light side Jedi and not your wholly corrupt Darksider, but someone straddling the line. I will get to more of that later. For now, simply think this as a gameplay and Force representation of the conflict in Kyle. He wants to do good, he wants to do right by Jan, but he's still riding all that rage and anguish. So his powers manifest both sides. If there is one major downside to the level design of Bespin, it's the coils room. A room with levels of heating coils. Walking on them hurts, and dying to them disintegrates Kyle. So it's a lot of jumping and then taking cover to heal. Why would you need to take cover? Glad you asked. You take cover because not only is the floor lava, but also there are more of those disruptor snipers. It's a whole lot of running, jumping, and then standing still to heal. Then peek around, take out the snipers, rinse and repeat for 5 different floors. It's not the most engaging of sections. Kyle works his way through the entirety of Bespin, fighting thugs and Imperials alike. Riding the air currents of the massive vents of the city, he faces a figure clad in robes and a red lightsaber. This is the first Reborn I mentioned before, the product of the Sun and Imperial Admiral Fayar's project. Soldiers infused with the power of the Valley of the Jedi. Hey, turnabout is fair play, and if Kyle can jumpstart his Force batteries with the Valley, it's only fair that the bad guys can do it too. The Reborn are a curious enemy, as they're not only Force users, they're color-coded for your convenience. The color of the robes informing their combat style and proficiency in using the Force. From the simple yellow, using the medium style, up to the big bad red ones that use every form of combat and Force powers. Kyle connects with the security forces and together they wipe the floor with a remnant and open the path to the hangar, where one of Relo's haulers is set to depart. Kyle finds Tavion there and a fight ensues. One that Kyle wins, but which I won after about 24 retries. Tavion is not easy and all the Reborn fights kinda lull you into a false sense of security. Before their fight, Tavion does spill the beans on the whole thing. That their forces are in the Valley of the Jedi, and that they killed Jan to get Kyle angry so he would head there. But much like it happened with Maul many years ago, the fight ends with Kyle facing his defeated enemy, full of rage and pain and ready to strike them down. Only difference is that while Maul wanted him to do it and taunted him, Tavion begs for her life. Kyle throws Jan's death in her face, and she can see her end coming. And that's when she drops the mother of all bombshells. Jan is alive. Kyle doesn't believe her, but Tavion tells him something that even to this day makes me go, huh, I didn't think of that, despite how logic it is. Why would we kill one of the only 2 people who know where the Valley of the Jedi is? The Valley is critical to their plans, and it's completely logical that they would keep Jan alive. They fake her death and make Kyle think she's dead, hoping he'll go to the Valley, but there's every chance he won't. Basing your entire plan on the hope that some manipulation might steer your enemy into doing your work for you is dumb. If it works, it looks like 4D chess, but if it doesn't, you're left hanging with nothing to go on. So I applaud the writers for making their villains make sense. Tavion tells Kyle that Jan is being held on Admiral Fayar's command carrier, the Doomgiver, the edgiest ship name ever. Who needs the Vengeance and the Executor when you have the Doomgiver? And she tells him that Relo's freight ship will take him to the base where the ship and the rest of their experiments are stationed. This base is Cairn Station, housed inside the eponymous Cairn, a massive asteroid. Inside is a sprawling Imperial complex, full of Reborn, Imperial soldiers, and the culmination of their project, the Shadow Troopers. Maybe a bit of a callback for Kyle Katarn finding a new set of jet black super soldiers. Only these are not droids, but Reborn in power armor made of cortosis. Now, even if you're not a Star Wars lore nerd, if you've been following the latest shows on Disney+, then cortosis might be familiar, and it's because it made its appearance in Acolyte. Cortosis is a mineral that naturally resists lightsabers. In fact, when the energy beam makes contact with the material, it tends to make lightsabers short out for a little bit. Now imagine Force-powered soldiers with armor that can take a hit from an enemy and disable their weaponry. It's brilliant. In the game though, cortosis doesn't disable the lightsaber, it only adds a metric ton of defense to the troopers. Fortunately, much like they do with the Reborn, your first encounter with the Shadow Trooper is a focused fight, just you and them, no other enemies around. And then over the course of the following levels, you encounter more of them, sometimes in combination with the Reborn. But it's not all bad, because if they're gonna pit super soldiers against you, and it's not cheating when you're joined by a powerful Force user dressed in all black. Yeah, that's right, Luke Skywalker joins up as your tag partner. And much like with Jan and Lando, their AI is outstanding. They actually hold their own in a fight. You don't need to be rescuing them. It's a minor thing, but it's one that makes Jedi Outcast stand out, even if it doesn't reach the heights of its predecessor. This companion AI is one thing that makes the final levels a joy to play. And yes, I'm getting ahead of myself, because at the end it's you and a bunch of Jedi instructors and students fighting off an invading force of Shadow Troopers and Reborn, and it's brilliant. Luke tells Kyle that the New Republic and Rogue Squadron have put the Sun's forces at the Valley on the run, and that at least for now, the place is cordoned off, so there will be no more Reborn being made. He also notes that Kyle seems less angry, more himself again, and Kyle confides that there's maybe hope that Jan is still alive on the Edge's ship of doom. Luke is pleased to hear it, and when Kyle mentions cortosis, Skywalker gives him a rundown of what it is. Oh, and in case you're wondering, the cortosis smuggling was the part Rilo was handling. But back to Cairn Station. Kyle fights his way through the base, killing scores of enemies in his path, leaving no survivors, except on the forced stealth section, where you have to either be very quick to kill enemies before they can sound the alarm, or avoid them altogether. Otherwise, they put you in the worst of punishments, unskippable death cutscenes. And when I say scores of enemies, I mean stormtroopers, officers, commanders, pilots, techs, Reborn, Shadow Troopers, and even a frigging AT-ST. Again, much like in the first game, Kyle is very much a one-man army at this point. Kyle does reach his destination, the Doomgiver, and gets on board, and then sees through a window that Luke is fighting the sand on the Cairn Station, the fight ending with the sand dropping part of the scenery on the Jedi Master before boarding the same ship you're on. Luke walks it off. Kyle and Skywalker talk over their comms as the ship is departing, so their call eventually loses signal. But the Jedi Master tells Kyle to find the ship's communication array to send a signal to Rogue Squadron. Kyle does this, and Rogue Leader asks him to disable the ship's shields so they can do a bombing run. Tarn tells him he has someone to find but will do his best. At that moment, the ship drops out of hyperspace over Yavin 4. This is what the Reborn and Shadow Troopers are for, to finish the job that the Sound started with that weakling student, to wipe the unworthy meat Jedi from the galaxy. And as Kyle continues on his latest shipwide massacre, they begin dropping trooper pods down onto the moon. And this is a mission where you can very much press a button in the control room and vent the hangars to space, sending all the enemies out into the cold, dark void. So it's quite the killing spree that Kyle gets up to, more or less tripling the body count from Jedi Knight and Dark Forces combined. I haven't done the math, but I'm fairly certain I'm correct. Kyle finally finds Jan in the brig and joyfully embraces her, happy she's alive. She calms him down, but he tells her he thought she was dead. She reassures him, but says she is in a lot of pain. They used a few interrogation droids on her, but she resisted them, which sounds impressive, and it is, but you have to remember that Jan is a rebel agent. When you're in that kind of fight with the enemy they were fighting, which made regular use of enhanced interrogation technique, it's not outside the bounds of reason that they would have training to resist such measures. Carl wonders if they wanted to know about the Valley of the Jedi, and Jan says that was just at the beginning. Later on, they wanted to know about the Academy, and that's where the pieces click into place for Kyle. He mentions the instructions given to him by Rogue Leader, and Jan mentions she knows where the shield array might be. How does she know this? No idea. But she does, and she guides Kyle to the door leading to the area with the shield generators. Kyle tells her to head to an escape pod and wait for him there. She jokingly tells him not to die on her, and he very solemnly says,
"And put you through the same misery I've been through? Not on your life."
Which is a line that says so much in so few words. Of course, getting the shields destroyed is no easy task. Not just because of the forces on the way, but Admiral Gallic Fire decides to step onto the battlefield himself, with a personal shield generator and a power armor, and ready to deal enormous pain to the Jedi. He might be the single hardest fight in the entire game. His shield repels you and burns through your health. He deals a ridiculous amount of damage with his gun. Your lightsaber is useless as long as he's got that shield. Fortunately, more kinetic-based weaponry disrupts the shield. And then, it's force feed time, baby! The best part about this fight is the preceding cutscene, where Fire happily informs Kyle of the invasion, before launching into a spiel how this will mark the beginning of his reign as Emperor. Then he starts boasting and listing accolades for all the things he will do, and how the stars will tremble. Kyle just casually throws his lightsaber at the shield generator, destroying it, and then in the snarkiest way possible, just adds one final line to his boast, saying, "Your shields will fall." As Kyle ends the fight with the Admiral, Rogue Squadron gets busy and all hell breaks loose on the ship. Life support goes out, gravity being the first thing, and damage across the ship creates very much a perilous path for Kyle to follow, avoiding lightning, fire, and even more hazards, until he reaches Jan and they leave on one of the escape pods. But that pod has bad aim, because instead of leaving them close to the academy where the action is, it drops them in a swamp a few hours away. Thankfully, Kyle has superpowers to run long distances in seconds. But before he goes, he and Jan discuss their plans. She's going to the hangars to help the Republic forces dogfighting in the skies. After all, if you remember, the Raven's Claw was left in the academy. And if history, and by that I mean the first Jedi Knight, proved anything, is that it may be Kyle's ship, but the one that flies it is Jan. Kyle tells her to avoid anyone with a lightsaber, and she gives him a look and says, "That's a good idea, Jedi." They embrace and kiss, and she tells him to go. I'm not a fan of this level. By this point, I want in on the lightsaber and lightsaber action, even considering I've been lightsabering for 75% of the game. But facing an entire horde of stormtroopers just doesn't have the same emotional weight. Having said so, there is a section where you control an AT-ST and use it to obliterate everything in your path. It fulfills a different side of the power fantasy and I like it. I very much approve of this. It's like they went, you're very much a demigod at this point, but what if you're a demigod on a mech? How does that sound? It sounds awesome. But inevitably, you will reach the academy and start fighting your way through the different Reborn and Shadow Troopers. And this is the part I described before as being utterly awesome. Kyle with the students and other teachers just going ham at it. It's amazing, it's pure genius, and the perfect climax to the story. Kyle pursues the Sun and sees him open a path to the temple underground, and after defeating some Shadow Troopers, Kyle follows. Below, after a Force Power Gauntlet, basically the hardcore version of the tutorial trial, he finds the Sun at the bottom, drinking deeply from the Force Nexus located there. A Force Nexus is the equivalent of a ley line in other fantasy. And the Sun doing this shouldn't come as a surprise. By now, this is the third instance of someone standing in a font of Force power in the series. Jarek in the Valley of the Jedi, Kyle himself in the core of the Temple of the Sith, and now the Sun on Jabin 4. This series has a thing for Force battery recharges. The Sun boasts of his plans, but Kyle bears the bad news for him. His Shadow Troopers have been routed and the ship above is gone. The Sun tries to contact Fire, but his phone unfortunately doesn't reach the world of the dead. His call doesn't connect. So he tries to make the best of a bad situation. And holy crap, this is a bad situation for him. He attempts to convince Kyle to join him, preying on Kyle's insecurities, especially in terms of not fitting in with the Jedi. But Kyle rebuffs him and tells him that yeah, that all may be true, but at least he's not alone, and tries to offer a hand to the Sun. Maybe get him to give up and return to the light, but Lizard Boy ain't having it, and declaring Kyle to be just another weakling, the fight starts. Now, this fight has a trick, a gimmick. It's the final boss is too hard, so there's a cheat to humiliate him. And it's that you can push a couple of buttons, reactivate the Force Nexus, and bathe in its energies and become temporarily invulnerable. I didn't do that. I merely discovered by sheer accident that the Sun really cannot defend himself against strong-style lightsaber attacks. Just flatten him. With the Sun's threat ended, Kyle rejoins Jan and they have a nice romantic moment, before heading up and talking to Luke in his chambers. Kyle jokes that maybe it took a failed Jedi to take care of another failed Jedi, but Luke remarks that Kyle was never a failure. Kyle is about to say something and Luke thinks he's going to ask for him to take the lightsaber again, but Katarn tells him he's gonna hold on to it, and that he's not saying he's ready to join the academy, because first he and Jan will take a much needed vacation. But after that, who knows? Luke tells him to take as much time as he needs, that they'll be there when he's ready. And eventually Kyle was ready and returned to the academy as a Jedi Master. And according to certain books, especially the role-playing ones, he became the academy's combat instructor. Kyle is a very unique fighter, even among the Jedi. Man not afraid of combining his lightsaber and powers with other mundane weaponry and using tactics that the sometimes rigid Jedi would never consider, which makes him the perfect person to teach a bunch of impressionable younglings on the merits of a good thermal detonator. Kyle's story then continues in a way that reminds me of the recently released Final Fantasy XIV expansion Dawn Trail. In that expansion, the character you play takes on more of a mentor role. And that is very much the next stage of Kyle's journey, as he takes on two apprentices, Jaden Core, who's very much an exceptional individual, arriving on the academy already having built a lightsaber, and the other is Rosh Pennin. Jedi Academy is Jaden Core's game. They're the protagonist. You can choose their sex and species, though the canon Jaden is a male human, so I'll refer to him as such for the rest of this narration. The story in this game deals with Tavion, who after escaping from Bespin, found the ancient Sith Lord Marco Ragnos and became his follower, taking a staff to various locations charged with the Force to drain them of their energy. There's your evolution in the series. In the threequel, the font of Force power is now portable. While Kyle in his own journey has his moments of temptation and his own crossroads with people he loved online, Jaden has his own, and that's Rosh. But unlike with Jedi Knight, the writers of Jedi Academy did their best to make Rosh the most annoying and obnoxious character in any Star Wars media. He's whiny, entitled, betrays you a couple of times. Never in any Star Wars property has there been a character whose brutal murder was more justified. And yet his continued existence is the path of the light side. Reminds me of the famous words of Dark Helmet.
Evil will always triumph, because good is dumb.
Honestly, I have never played a game and witnessed a story where the dark side action felt so genuinely correct. Kyle takes a backseat and is very much a supporting character for Jaden, but when he's traveling with his apprentice, he's there to show the player how powerful they will be by the end of the game, as his Force powers are maxed out and he can do absolutely everything extremely well. But there's another aspect, and it's that in his mentoring, you get to witness Kyle's new philosophy, the culmination of his journey in the light, in the dark, and then somewhere in between. He tells his students that light and dark are just labels. They're just classifications. That light side powers and dark side powers are not really important. And these are merely tools at their disposal. And that their will and their intent is what truly matters. Having said so, the game does feature a morality system like the one in Jedi Knight, only much more focused on your choice of powers, but never locking you out of one side. You can max out the light side like I did and get that ending, but there will be points left to add to dark side powers, letting you do the great Jedi thing fairly well. When Jaden is at his crossroad, Kyle connects with him and through a mental link urges Jaden not to give in to the absolutely justified temptation to kill the ever-loving hell out of Rosh, and instead forgive him and help him back to the academy. If Jaden falls to the dark side, then on fighting Tavion and then Marco Ragnos, the last fight before the end is against Kyle Katarn. And it is by far the hardest fight in the entire series. Kyle uses every trick at his disposal and is the only character capable of using Force Pull to rip the lightsaber out of Jaden's hands. And proving that his combat style is unique, he even gets up close and personal, grappling Jaden and delivering a curb stomp beatdown. And thus ends the tale of Kyle Katarn in the games. The stories will continue in other media, especially novels. Kyle will remain at the Academy as a Jedi Master and take part in the many conflicts to come, such as the saga with the Yuuzhan Vong, a race of beings completely cut off from the Force, and whose technology was 100% organic, doing mechanical technology as a blasphemy. It's a great saga, go read it. Kyle also penned a book, a guide for new espionage agents, and I think that's rich coming from a guy that never did all that much spying in the games, preferring to kick the door down and start taking names. But create a book he did. Kyle as a character was always one of the more unique Jedi. Where Luke became a pensive, contemplative Jedi, Kyle was still very much the same rogue and mercenary he ever was. The same dry wit and his very well-nurtured pessimism, sarcasm, and a smidge of cynicism. Not to mention a complete inability to mince words. In his years after the games, he took his experience as a Republic agent for gathering information and waiting and seeing into his role as a Jedi Master, choosing most of the time to listen and then delivering one of those brutally honest comments to cut through the noise. But what makes Kyle such a fascinating character is that he's been through it all. The journey to the Force, having destiny thrust upon him, having a brush with the dark side, finding his way back, feeling insecure, self-loathing even, convinced that he was not worthy of the powers he had. And he takes all that and uses it to better shape the next generation of Jedi. He doesn't shy away from accepting his mistakes, and in a universe that many times favors the depiction of Jedi as bastions of goodness, A down-to-earth, dirty old mercenary with a lightsaber and a heart of gold with many flaws and issues is perhaps one of the more realistic and well-written characters. To close this ramble off, let's just say what makes Kyle impressive is that he grows as a person. He learns and he evolves. He may be a one-man army killing machine space wizard, but he's still very human. One last thing. You gotta give props to Jason Court, the actor who played him in the FMV cutscenes in Jedi Knight, for injecting so much personality and charisma into this character. The other voice actors did a phenomenal job, especially Jeff Bennett, who voiced him in Outcast and Academy, a performance that truly captures the emotional journey of Kyle Katarn. Not just dealing with the loss of Jan and then the euphoria of finding her alive, also with the inner turmoil ever present in Kyle in terms of his rocky relationship with the Force, and doing so while still remaining true to the character that Court portrayed. I still hope beyond hope that Kyle may find his way to the new canon, but I fear if he does, he won't be even remotely the same rogue Jedi that we all came to know and love. I could be wrong, and I really want to be wrong. I hope you've enjoyed this look into the journey and the life of Kyle Katarn, and a look at the Jedi Knight series in a bit more detail. And before I go, if you're wondering how I rank up the games in the series, it's pretty simple. Jedi Knight, Outcast, and Academy at the top, followed by Dark Forces and then Mysteries of the Sith in last place. The last level of Mysteries of the Sith is a crime of level design. But with that, may the Force be with you, and I'll see you on the next one.